happy to be here with you. You meet me for the first time, of course, but I've been living inside your words for several months. So yeah, so I feel like a former tenant in the house of your semantic universe. I think translating is in fact writing inside somebody's writing, writing without the oppressive freedom of invention. And translating the undying has been a thrilling adventure for me. Your beautiful book is made of many floors and layers. I think a great writer is like a tree of languages. It grows a different language for every one of its thoughts. And in your book, every thematic branch has a different expressive frequency. It's sharp and surgical when dealing with the urgency of denunciation and describing the horror of oncological capitalism. Then it's airy and lyrical when immersed in the intimacy of the horizontal life, the imaginative linguistic space of dreaming on your bed. And it's apocalyptical and asphyxial when dealing with the knots of history. And so technology and suspicion, care and despair, poetry and oppression merge in the book, each with its words and silences, building a dazzling memento that behind the stiff language imposed on us by society with its policies, its class, gender, profit policies, exist the feverish, ever-changing languages of inner life that will never adapt to what the world will make of us. So, well, I'd like to ask you how you worked and sailed on these stylistic landslides of style and feeling, and if you had maps and notes or just relied on your instinct, and in what ways life interrupted you while you were working on this.
Well, the book just kept failing. I kept failing at the book. So everything I thought I would write and every style that I thought I would try on wouldn't work. So I'd start again. I'd become discouraged. I think I couldn't do it. So it took me a long time to write a very short book. And the amount of words that I wrote, in proportion to the amount of words in the book, I think maybe, I don't know, 200,000 words for less than 50,000. Many of those words were like that I'm not proud of, that I think like in some ways I did some of the worst writing of my life while I was trying to get it out. But what finally made me able to write it is that I remembered I was a poet and that I could stretch language however I needed it to. Like I didn't have to give that up to write this book. And in fact, it was that which, when I finally made the realization, when I gave myself full permission to write in my own way, then I was able to put it together. So a lot of the work is, so like those little passages are condensed from much larger amounts of language. So, you'd have like 3,000 words and it would turn into 300 words by the end of my revision process. And so that's kind of that's how it worked. I think that part where I condense language is just normal for me in general. I think that giving myself permission to have so many different style shifts and tone shifts in the book was something new for me and something that made it possible. Like, I don't think that my first intention was to write the book really straight, like just a very, I don't know, like anybody could write it, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And that clearly wasn't going to work for me. The book would never get written if I had to write it that way.
Okay. So one of the main themes of your book is the role society assigns to every sick person. It's a role that flattens their individuality in the name of some collective need to learn from someone who's believed to be closer to heaven the real meanings of their lives, falling under tones of false values. So teenage girls grow up watching movies where young women with cancer are guardian angels whose productive relationship with life is obliterated. They cannot create, they can only incubate They contain and sublimate. They are only meant to give others reasons to keep living and ways to do it better. So the sick woman has to be brave. Her bravery is the Tibetan bell of our bad living. We needed to wake up from our trivialities and to raise flying to truth. So what kind of revolution do you think we can hope for to change our cancer narratives, along with, of course, the powerful one of literature?
I mean, I don't know. It was so absolutely frustrating to be cast into that role and to not know quite what to do with it, because I did not want to exist on a symbolic level. Right? Like I didn't want people to see me not as to see me as some sort of iconic sick person that could serve all those instrumental functions in society. On the other hand, I needed to acknowledge that sickness is often a border experience, right? It's a liminal experience. So you do move through a kind of passage in which you're granted new perception on the structure of the world. And so I wasn't going to pretend like to be sick was with a catastrophic illness was utterly like average. It wasn't like every other day of my life. But on the other hand, I was still a person, and I still had all of this sort of complexity and needs and foibles of an individual. Like I couldn't just be brave and sick. I couldn't just be strong and sick, or all the things that a sick person was supposed to be, as I understood them. And so I had the individual problem of trying to parse out how to be sick and to still be myself. But my individual solution doesn't grant a global solution to the way that illness is approached. And certainly this changes, like across cultures and in different kind of economic structures. So the way an American person is sick is not the way that, a person in Ecuador is sick, right? That we have cultural particularities around it. But at least what I hope to do, especially in America, which is obsessed with youth and health in a really kind of ironic way in which we are like profoundly unhealthy, and yet constantly sort of project these images of health and have endless amounts of people on treadmills just walking and walking and walking, right? Like seeking the health that they can never find. I think that here in the culture in which I was sick, the most important thing was to try at least to push to show that the boundary between sickness and health is not fixed, it's not firm, that a healthy person today is a sick person tomorrow, or a healthy person today is just a sick person who hasn't had the realization yet that these zones of life are not completely shut off from one another. And so, obviously a book can play like a tiny role for who reads it, but I think overall the book kind of joined a set of work and conversations among artists and writers and others about the nature of sickness in society. So in that sense, the more people you have having the conversation in the most context, then you do have the possibility of moving things along a little bit.
Yeah. Well, the COVID pandemic changed the trajectory of our gaze upon ourselves and the world. So if it used to start from the self, from our body, and then land on the others, now it starts from contagious, threatening world, and then it apprehensively gets stranded on ourselves. So it lingers on our brittleness, on that very body that used to feel sturdy and invincible, and that has now become a field of fear and alarmed self-analysis. So you wrote about the strangeness of living in a sick body before COVID made it the main theme. Do you think you have some privileged point of view to the pandemic, having already gone through this discovery process of the body's truth?
Well, I think a lot of cancer survivors and other people who've survived catastrophic illnesses, like we all have the secret. We all sort of know, like we just even things like how to wash our hands or when to wear a mask. Like we've all been through this, and so we do. I mean, like just in the most practical level, even the one of how to stay home and not completely lose your mind, how to be alone and not allow oneself to like completely fall into the depths of despair. These were all things we had practice with. And so when we watch everyone else doing them, it's kind of like, oh, they're learning too, right? The other problems of talking to other cancer survivors sometimes though is that people get triggered by everything that's happening. So the smell of hand sanitizer and the look the mask can take them back to the oncology ward. So we both have secret knowledge and then maybe a little bit of like lingering extra fear around some of the things that the pandemic has made so visible. It's the thing about the pandemic. So I had these like incredibly strong premonitions right at the turn of the year. As soon as I heard about the virus, that this was all going to happen. So I kept sort of being haunted by dreams, and I felt it so urgently. I think everyone around me thought I was crazy. So in January, the beginning of February, and I kept telling people like, get masks and get hand sanitizer and have extra groceries because we're in for this really big thing. And I don't know. So I've talked to other people who've survived serious illness who too also had this like really striking feeling this year before it all happened. And so also there's just, I don't know, extra fear, extra caution, something that clicked into place in which I think that my perception that the world was going to go through something this year was really strong from the very beginning. Yeah.
I understand because I had it too. It's like being attuned to apocalypse. So you can sense it from far and it's coming closer. And so now a question about horizontal life. So horizontality has been a theme of confessional poetry. Sylvia Plath, in one of her most famous poems, wished to be horizontal in order to stop having expectations towards life and gain the grateful passivity of flowers. Anne Sexton wrote, "The days are horizontal, the days are a drag, all of the skeleton in me is in trouble." You create a whole emotional cosmology about it, explaining how, from that angle, thoughts have a specific volatile power that does not linger on usual practical aspects, but turns logical reasonment into a kaleidoscope of oniric associations and mythological symbolism. And, well, I want to know more about your right angle life, that is the backstage of your writing routine, like how much you write daily, if you write every day or follow the inspiration, if you have rituals, books, thoughts that motivate you, and how does your right angle life interact with your vertical life, and of course how it interacted with the horizontal life.
The Plath poem that I am vertical, but I would rather be horizontal. When I was a teenager, this was one of my absolute favorite poems. And so that I'm glad you mentioned it. I like whatever that poem, not just the figure of horizontality, but something about the rhythm of the language in that poem stuck with me so deeply that sometimes I see poems that I've written that have the same sonic texture that one poem that the teenage version of myself read again and again and again, sort of like took that inside of me somehow. In terms of my writing practice, I realized that how good of writer I am depends on how early I wake up in the morning. Mm-hmm. So if I wake up at 5 a.m, I'm a genius. And if I wake up at 9, I'm like barely average, right? Mm-hmm. And so I sometimes I'm just, whatever's going on emotionally or something, I wake up early anyways because I can't sleep through the night. But sometimes I have to force myself into wakefulness so that I can write. And when I don't do it, it seems as if nothing I write is okay. And so I think, again, it's those liminal states, right? So that whatever that period in which you're half in the dream and half at the keyboard is what makes writing possible for me. One of the things about cancer is I was just always in that state. So the writing for the Undying, at least the very raw materials that I wrote during treatment and in its immediate aftermath, I didn't have to wake up early to write them because I was just always like half in a dream state, I think. And, steroids and pain pills and all of the things which like create a different state of reality. And so that one was a little bit different. But what I'm doing now is like, I have to wake up before dawn. I have to wake up, look outside, and there's the moon and the stars. And then I sit down and I look out and there's the sun. And so somehow in that period of dawn is when the writing comes. As far as reading, I just read everything. Like I just read and read. And I read terrible things sometimes. Just stubbornly, like I have to read all the way through them and grasp it, like everything I can to try to see if there's something inside of it that has some meaning for me.
And do these terrible things that you get to read actually harm you? Do you think they harm you or in any way? Because that's what I feel when I read something terrible. It's very close to an emotional rape.
Or to self-harm, right? Like those things that we do. I mean, I've gotten tougher about it. Like I used to I think I used to be far more devastated by some of the things I shouldn't read that I ended up reading. And maybe as I've gotten older, I'm a little bit more calloused. So I don't quite have, I feel in control. How's that sound? For the most part, even when I'm reading terrible things now, I feel like I'm in control. I don't feel like I'm in control when I read something great, though. Like, that I still haven't figured out how not to just be thrown like completely topsy-turvy by amazing literature.
What's the first amazing book that you read, like in your life?
Oh,
Yes.
I don't know. My God. I don't know. Because I just read children's literature. I mean, it's like pretty typical for an Anglophone little girl. I read Little Women. And my friend, I had one friend because we were weird. And so we started a Louisa May Alcott reading club, and we would wear skirts in the day. We were supposed to wear pants because there were team sports. And so we would wear skirts and dresses so we wouldn't have to play sports, so that we could sit on the playground and talk about books instead. And so I suppose Little Women was probably like the thing which at least inspired me to revolt, right, with my friend. And then the thing a little bit later, which I felt like gave me permission to be strange, was finding Gertrude Stein at a used bookstore. And then I thought, oh, this is written in my language. It is like a language which pushed all the borders of everything I knew, and yet somehow felt more familiar to me than what I was being told as a teenager that I was supposed to. What was supposed to make sense didn't make sense, but Gertrude Stein made sense.
Yeah. So So imagination has a powerful role in your book as a power that does not only belong to people, but to technology and to the inanimate medical reality that we encounter when we fall ill. So death imagined by the living and the body imagined by the screens. Mm-hmm. Deathbeds imagined by painters and ancient Rome's imagined by a patient in a clinic. therapists that treat bits of corpses, and the virtual cry of Giulietta Masina in A Temple of Tears. Google has Pandora's box of pre-imagined pain and ready-to-be-imagined statistics. Do you think imagination is a gift that is being dismissed, that our world is losing? And as while we change the world with our fantasy, the world changes our fantasy. How did your imagination change after what you went through?
Unfortunately, I think that the world has or not the world, the arrangement of the world and the people in power have ghoulish imaginations, right? So the orchestrators of social media, which somehow figured out the way to attract people, to addict them to screens, is to make them so upset that they constantly push a button to refresh, to have a little bit of relief from their panic and anxiety. So this is an act of ghoulish imagination on the part of those companies. And I think the way that I see the world is that our pain, the pain we feel, the cruelty we inflict is very imaginative, but our pleasure is really banal. That our pleasure lacks imagination, that we don't live in a world that has found ways, right? Like Charles Fourier, he had the 19th century utopian French philosopher, dreamed of a world war of pastries in which we could satisfy our desire for war and our desire for dessert. And the entire world would go to war to have the best pastry. Now that is great. And then afterwards there would be an orgy, but he said that the orgy wouldn't even be, like the sex part wouldn't be nearly as good as the part in which everybody was doing the baking, right, in anticipation. So that's imaginative pleasure. And instead what we get for pleasure is like a good TV, like we were supposed to binge watch Netflix, or we're supposed to, I don't know, feel pleasure when a political candidate gets in office. Like that's the thing we're supposed to dance for, right? And so this is where I think writers, and especially poets, perhaps we can imagine better pleasures. Perhaps we can rival the forces of profit that can imagine all sorts of tortures, all sorts of ways to extract the meaning and purpose from human life, of making people feel small, of diminishing them, of profiting off their pain. Perhaps we can rival their imaginative cruelty with new visions of pleasure. And so this is what I think right now. And I think that as we move through the pandemic, whatever that thing, the imagination preserving the capacity for pleasure becomes more and more important to me, because so many people seem to be losing it. So that we have a lot of work to do, right? We who imagine.
So you talk a lot about the power of both constructive and deconstructive of narratives. And the whole book is a heartbreaking reparative narrative operating on the weak points of our profit-obsessed Western culture. Because only literature and the stories we tell about our bodies and our spirit, about our contaminated and contaminating world, only the stories that we tell ourselves when we lay still on our beds can save us from the gloomy, merciless confusion of living on this planet. It won't be certainly the comforting stories that cancel contradictions that will keep us safe. It will be the ones that hold everything, understand everything, and therefore keep it safe. What kind of stories do you think new generations need to make sense and possibly be able to change this horrible world we?
Well, I think that what I'd like to see is, I would like to see people actually account for what our life really looks like, So what it is we're doing, for example, this world in which we all stroke screens like we're stroking the cheeks of a child, right? So that anyone, so I've become addicted to posterity during this pandemic. So, you know, I think a lot of people time shortened. Now I just keep thinking, oh, 2,000 years from now, like, you know, what would I write for somebody in 2,000 years? What would I write for someone in 5,000 years? And the thing I think I would want to write is that we walk around just stroking a piece of glass all day, and that our eyes are always like the distance of a mother and an infant to something, right? But that the something is a machine, and that this is like the phone and the screen, the laptop, all these things. So what I imagine that the people who are born after me can do is like begin to understand what that means when our very physical form, when we bend our heads in different ways and we use our hands, and then whatever the material processes that are involved in the arrangement of life, the fact that all these people work, they just work every day, they just work, right? They go to school, they reach adulthood, they work, and then they die at the end. So what does that mean? How do you tell that story? Because that situation, to me, the situation in which life is just lived, in order to go to work so you can live your life and then you go back and you go back, is like an actual crime, right? And so how do you tell those stories? And so I would hope people younger than me would break away from the romance of the story that leaves all of the parts out, right? Like that doesn't recognize the strangeness of phones or even roads, like all of these things that are all around us, these like historically rather new things of industrial modernity, what we inherited from the 20th century and what we're doing in the 21st. Like to see literature that put all that in, that knew that people worked, that thought about what it is that we did with our bodies, our eyes, our intimacies. I would love. This is the account I think we need to give. And I think, you know, when you talk about books that harm us, I think that the thing I most get mad about is sometimes if I pick up a novel and there's nothing of the world in it. Not in the sense that some beautiful otherworld ethereal promise is in it either, but there's just all that's left of the world is this just sort of shadow of narrative banality. Right. So it's not even like a full engagement with narrative banality. It's just some sort of like offshoot of it. That's the one that gets me really mad, is when I come across those kinds of text. And I certainly hope that the writers to come will try to see the world with eyes as strange as the world actually is.
Yeah. So, and now a cheesy question about love, because I'm in my last book. So I wrote a book where love is seen as a sort of contagion, and so as the love affair smashes down the barriers of the self, all our past narratives rise again and infects the other, begging to be rewritten, hoping this time to have an affection that feels right. You wrote about a disease that can't infect, and which heals also thanks to love. So love in the book given by Precious Friends is the ultimate medicine. So would you say that love, in contrast to cancer, is highly contagious?
I don't know, because I was betrayed too. This is like the book, you know, so this is like the thing, I tried not to just write a book about how I've been sort of betrayed and abandoned when I got diagnosed with cancer, because I didn't want to write that, because that's why I felt really sorry for myself. Like sometimes I would just cry so much that my iPad wouldn't work anymore because there were so many tears on it, because I'd been, it was when I was diagnosed with cancer, it was like a couple important people just disappeared. Like just the people I'd counted on for years that I had loved in various ways, and they were gone. And it, and I think in my weakest moments, like all I could actually think about was romantic love in its absence, or the pain involved in it. And tried very, very hard to expand past it, to see all these other forms of relation that had meaning beyond the one of romantic love. But I'm always like, I don't know, I mean, the romantic love too, like the passionate, neurotic kind, has always been the thing I love to think and write about. And so even in The Undying, despite the fact that it sort of begins with the betrayal, and I really try to keep it out, there's still this kind of like thing that peeks up through it, which is the desire that I would rather be kind of trying to understand that than what I was forced to understand, which was being sick. I mean, I do think I have a line that I'd rather be writing like Marguerite Duras than to be writing a book about cancer, which it really meant. But maybe it was maybe a good way to write about love, by not writing about it exactly, like to just hold the sort of whatever smoldering pain of it inside the text.
And so, well, the title. I think the title you chose is very interesting, as it takes a word usually associated with the comforting notion of something everlasting like love, and use it to describe a metaphysical limbo that it's between life and death. So it's a life that contains death, like a yin and yang of life-death. Mm-hmm. And well, you talked a lot about barriers today. So I was thinking about the fact that we live in a culture that actually has very thick barriers between love and death. It's like a very strong cultural need that we have. We are in a culture that cannot accept the ambiguous nature of death, and therefore prefers a clear-cut dualism to the nuances that better describe the presence of death in our lives. So can you tell us a bit about how you chose the title and about what it means to be undying?
Yeah, I mean, this what you talked about, the absolute manic insistence that life and death are distinct, and that death is terrible and a failure, and that life at all costs is somehow victory. This makes me so angry. It strips death of its beauty and power. Mm-hmm. Right? And like death has so many things about it. I mean, I got really close to it. This was my commitment to myself when I wrote the book. It's like, if I'm going to go through this, like I got this little skeleton and I set it next to me in my room. And so I was like, well, death's just going to sit there, right? And I'm going to think about this. I'm going to read everything I can. I'm going to look at all of the art. I'm going to use this as the opportunity to become intimate with this thing which society has hidden away, has degraded, right? Has found, again, at least in the United States, a source of profit from it. So to die is quite expensive. Mm-hmm. But it's also like extremely alienated. And so I hated the insult to death, and I hated the insult to the dead, who I don't consider to be failures, right? Even a person who dies young of disease did not do it because there was something wrong with their character. But the suggestion was everywhere in this kind of winner takes all culture that I come from. And so there I was inside of this, trying to understand death, trying to undo the survivor narratives that had one as a champion and the other as a loser. And so the word "the undying" just seemed to be perfect because it suggested, right, all the things stayed contained in the negation. And it was also useful that it has like a kind of feeling of an undying work of literature or an undying love, because the words that normally come after the word undying helped because those were in the book too, right? Like, because I was also thinking about literature. I was also thinking about not just literature, very old, ancient works of literature, like the great works of literature, this oeuvre of literature about illness, which to enter into it was like a little bit terrifying because so many brilliant people had written before me, especially brilliant women, about the experience of being ill. And so the undying kept all of the words that are usually in the end of it. It kept inside of the negation of the un and the dying, all of the possibility that every negation always holds, right? Which is, it always holds a sort of tremendous, like, fecund mystery of the thing that exists and isn't at the same time. And it just, it held inside of that negation, that mystery, all that possibility, everything that I was feeling. But I still, to this day, I think that the anger I like actually can't get over is the one about the diminishment of death. I sometimes feel personally insulted when death is insulted. Like I was writing, actually, Judith Butler, who wrote her newest book, and I wrote her an email, and I was just like, I tried to promise her I wasn't a partisan of death, but I might actually be a little bit, right? Like that I did feel the need to defend it in our conversation as a thing which must not always be feared, but has like is just as much as what we are as being born.
Yeah. I agree. So they're telling me that our time is up. Yes. So thanks so much.
Oh, I'm so happy to get to talk to you. Hopefully we will get to talk again, and maybe in person someday.
Yeah, that would be great.